Hi, I'm Gillian Cameron, and this is the third in a series of storytelling on Sunday evenings. And if you saw the note, I'm calling the thing Myth Congeniality, which is the name of a blog I used to keep and maybe I should start doing again. Let's continue with the ongoing story of the Ramsbottoms. So, in the first two episodes, young Albert Ramsbottom has been swallowed by a lion, and just as his parents were about, in the second one, as his parents were about to collect the insurance, he came back. This is Albert's birthday, and a very special one. It was young Albert Ramsbottom's birthday, and his parents asked what he liked most. He said, "To see Tad of London and gaze upon Anne Boleyn's ghost." Well, they thought the request were unusual, and at first to refuse were inclined, till Pa said Triptometrobus might broaden the little lad's mind. So they took Cherry Banks up to London. They got there at 3:45, and seeing as pubs wasn't open, they went straightway to Tower. They didn't think much to the building. 'Twant what they was led to suppose, and the bloody Tower didn't impress them. They said Blackpool has got one of those. At last Albert found a beefeater, and he filled the old chap with alarm by asking for ghost of Anne Boleyn, who carries her head neath her arm. Beefeater said, "You ought to come Friday if it's ghost of Anne Boleyn you seek. The union now limits her output. She only gets one walk a week. But he says, if it's ghosts that you're after, there's Lady Jane Grey's to be seen. She runs around chased by the headsman at midnight on Old Tower Green." So they waited around to near midnight, thinking it time for a sup. They took out the grub they brought with them and waited for ghost to show up. At the first stroke of midnight, young Albert, his mouth full of cold dripping toast, took his stick with the horse's head handle and pointed and said, "Here's the ghost." They felt their flesh going all goosey as Lady Jane's spectre drew near, and Albert fair swallowed his tonsils when the headsman and all did appear. He chased Lady Jane round the grass thatch, his axe it did flash in the moon, and seeing as poor lass were headless, they wondered what next he would prune. They suddenly caught sight of Albert, as midnight were on its last chime. As he lifted his axe, father murmured, "We'll get the insurance this time." But mother rose up taking umbrage. She says, "Here, put that cleaver away. You're not taking our Albert's head off. Young collar were clean on today." But the brave little lad stood undaunted. As the ghost drew within half a pace, and taking toast he were eating, slapped it, dripping side down in ghost's face. 'Twere a proper setback for the headsman. He give out a howl of despair, and taking his lady friend with him, he disappeared just like that there. When father saw what had happened, he shivered a bit and turned blue, till Ma come and patted his shoulder, said, "It's all right, lad. We saw it too." Some say 'twere the dripping had done it. From a roast leg of mutton it came, and seeing as ghost were beefeater, they figured he'd vanished from shame. But round Tower Green from that moment, they've not seen the sign of a ghost. But when beefeaters go on night duty, they take slices of cold, dripping toast. And that's Albert and the headsman. You might have noticed last week when I told the juniper tree that the Grimm brothers can be just that. These are not stories for children, just like the child ballads were not ballads for children. I was asked tonight, or earlier today, if this would be a presentation that would be suitable for kids. Yes, it is. But I would not tell every single Grimm tale to small children. Some of them are really nightmare material, which doesn't bother me. I like having a good rip snorter of a nightmare every so often. But, yeah, these were stories that were told by adults to adults. And if children happen to be in the room then so much the better. There was no splitting until later. How did they become children's stories? I mean, the title of the book that the Grimm brothers created was Kinder- und Hausmärchen, which mean children and household tales. Well, as you have, with the coming of the middle class, and later with the coming of the Industrial Revolution, but particularly with a middle class that began after the great plagues of the Middle Ages, and more people became literate, the folk tales were relegated back to peasants. But as you have a middle class, these are former peasants who are not going to bother themselves with that. So who do they hire to take care of the kids? A peasant woman. And how is she going to entertain the kids? By telling her the stories that she learned at her mother's knee. And so that's how they ended up in the nursery. But originally, these are stories to be told from people to people, and that's how folk tales should be told. Well, this is a story called The Drummer, and I'm going to take a bit of ginger beer. And let's begin. Long, long ago, long before any of us were born, long before any memory, there was a drummer. Now I have to wonder what exactly he did, since he did not seem to be in the army, but he certainly had a drum, which probably made him very popular in the village. At any rate, he was out walking one evening early, and he happened to pass by a pond, and he saw 3 of the most beautiful pieces of linen on the banks of the pond. And he looked down and picked one up. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw 3 swans that had been swimming in the pond. 2 of them flew away, and with them disappeared the other 2 pieces of linen. But the piece of linen he had, he put into his bag and went home. The other swan was nowhere to be seen. That night, as he lay in bed, he heard a voice. "Drummer, drummer, give me my shift." He tried to roll over and sleep. "Drummer, drummer, give me my shift." He opened his eyes and he said, "Who are you?" I am a king's daughter, and my sisters and I were the swans that you saw. We come to that pond and we swim. We lay our shifts by the side of the pond and we swim. My 2 sisters went back to my father, but I cannot go anywhere until you give me back my shift. So, where are you? Where do you go?" And she said to him, "I live far, far away, far from my father and far from you. I live on a mountain, many, many leagues from you, and that mountain is made of glass. And I am the slave to an old and hideous hag. She has a spell upon me, and that cannot be broken." He said, "I will break it. I will come and rescue you. I promise that. Where is this to be found?" And she said, "It's on the other side of a great desert and of a great forest, and in that forest there are giants that eat humans. Don't even bother. You could never." He said, "I shall." And he threw the piece of linen into the air, and it disappeared. And the next morning he packed provisions and kissed his mother and father on both cheeks, and he walked, and he walked, and he walked. He left his village, and he left all signs of civilization. After many, many days, he came to a huge and vast desert. And then, again, he walked, and he walked, and he walked, till it seemed like he would never find the end of that desert. But ultimately he did. Finally he did. In the distance he saw the trees grow out of the sand until there was no sand, but there was nothing but trees. This must be where the giants live, he thought. Well, I will now deal with them. And so he walked into the forest, wary, looking, hardly breathing. The giants must be here somewhere. He looked and he tiptoed from tree to tree, expecting a giant to come at him any minute. And further he went, and further he went, looking for the giants, looking for the giants, looking for the giants. Where are the giants? And finally he took out his drum, and he started to beat it. And he beat a military tattoo, ta-tum, 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 until finally he heard footsteps that drowned out the sound of his drum. Boom, 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 until standing before him was a giant. And the giant looked down at him, and he said, "What do you think you're doing? I was trying to sleep, and all of your racket awoke me. I'm going to eat you right now, and right after you tell me why you're here in the first place." And Drummer said, "Well, it's funny you should ask. I was beating my drums so I could summon my troops. We're all on our way here to conquer this forest and kill you giants." The giant was unimpressed. "You think you're going to kill me? And how on earth you're going to do that? I can step on every single one of you." "Well, yes, when you're awake, but you have to sleep sometime. And I have thousands and thousands of men, each of them with a silver hammer and a silver sword. And when you're asleep, every single one will come and beat you to a pulp." Well, the giant thought about that, and he said, "Well, I can deal with other giants, and I can deal with any kind of wild animal, but I can't deal with these little worms." He said, "Very well then. What do you want? You tell me what you want. As long as you send your army away, it's yours." And Drummer said, "Very well then. What I would like is for you to take me to the other side of this forest, to the Glass Mountain." The giant said, "That is a big thing to ask for. Are you sure?" "I'm sure." He said, "Very well then." And he picked him up and put him in his shirt pocket. And they began to walk. And Drummer was quite pleased with himself. He took out his drum and and the giant did find that made the walking easier. He also said to himself, "Well, perhaps that's the tattoo to send all his troops away. Very well then, I made a good decision here." And so he continued to walk, and he walked, and thump, 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 until he was about a third of the way through the forest, and he got bored. And so he found another giant, pulled Drummer out of his pocket and gave him to him, and gave him the instructions to take him to the Glass Mountain. The other giant said, and so he did, except he put him in his buttonhole up here. And when he did, Drummer had to hold on to the button in order to stay steady, but he was even higher, and so he was actually enjoying this quite a lot because he could see the eyes of the birds in the trees looking at him, and I'm on the same level with you now. And so that giant continued to walk and walk and walk until he got bored 2/3 of the way through and found another giant and said, "Here, take him to the glass mountain." The third giant, "Why? I have no reason to." "Oh, bloody hell." So he put him up in his hat. And Drummer was even more pleased at this. And he could see below him, he could see the trees, he could look up directly into the clouds, and he took out his drum and again beat another marching tattoo for that giant. The giant, having a drum beating in his hat, was not particularly pleased with this, especially since he had no idea why he was carrying the drummer and not eating him. Finally, they came to the end of the forest, and the giant picked Drummer out of his hat and put him on the ground at the base of the glass mountain. And Drummer said, I wonder if you could put me on top, please, giant?" The giant simply said, and walked out of the story. Well, Drummer turned around and he looked at that mountain. It was like a mountain placed upon another mountain, and all of glass that shone green and pure in the sunlight and slick as ice. And as he was looking up, he tripped over something and looked down. And he saw that he had nearly tripped over a rotting horse's skull. And as he looked around, he found that he was surrounded by the rotting flesh and skeletons of all the men and horses that had come to this mountain. All of them who had died there at the base. And he began to wonder about his quest. But he didn't wonder long, because he heard voices off over to the side. Voices saying, "It's my turn." "No, it isn't. It's my turn." "No, it's mine." "No, no, 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 no. I had the turn last, and you had the turn last. It's my turn now." "No, it's mine." And he went over, and he found 2 men arguing over an empty saddle that lay there on the ground. And he walked up and he said, "What are you 2 idiots arguing about? That's an empty saddle. There is no horse." And the first one looks at him. "Oh, you think you know everything, do you?" Yes. You think you know everything, do you?" "I'll tell you what this is. This is a magic saddle. It belongs to the both of us, but we take turns in using it. All we have to do is sit in it and wish, and we can be anywhere we want. Except that he insists on taking my turn. No, it's my turn. No, it's my turn." "Well, let me settle this," said the drummer. "I will create a contest." And he took one of his drumsticks and he walked 1,000 paces away and stuck it in the ground, and he walked back to the 2 of them by the saddle. And he said, "Now, I will be the judge. You 2 will race to that drumstick, and whoever touches that drumstick first uses the saddle. Ready, steady, go!" And the 2 of them started to run, and when they were just far enough away, he jumped into the saddle and wished himself at the top of the mountain. It was a very strange land up there. Directly ahead of him was an old stone cottage with a huge fish pond to one side. And amazingly, you could see down through the water and into the glass below. And over to another side was a gigantic forest. But there was a path that went straight to the cottage, and that was what he chose. And so he walked up to that cottage, and he suspected whom it might belong to. He knocked on the door, and an old woman, withered, ugly, stretched out beyond her years, answered. And she said, "Oh, and what would you want from me?" And he said, "Well, I just simply would like, since I am a traveler and am quite exhausted from climbing that mountain, I wonder if I might have lodging and food for the night." "Oh, very well, but you must pay for it. We will determine that in the morning." And so that night he slept in the house of the hag. And when morning came, she said, "I've a job for you. I want you to go and empty that entire fish pond out there. I want you to empty it, and when you are done, I want you to stack all the fishes in order of size. And here is your tool." And she gave him a thimble. "You want me to drain the entire pond with a thimble?" "Yes, I do. And if you do not, I would not want to tell you the consequences." "Very well, then. I will do it." And he went out and sat by the edge of that pond. And for hours and hours and hours he threw thimbles full of water over his shoulder. And by noon he looked at the pond, and it was completely the same as when he went out there in the morning. He sat beside the pond. He put his head down, and he began to weep. And as he wept, a maiden came out of the cottage, a beautiful maiden in servant's clothes, and she put her hand on the drummer's shoulder, and she said, "Drummer, drummer, why do you weep?" He said, "Why do I weep? I have come here to rescue a princess, and look what I am doing. I am on a fool's errand. I am supposed to empty this pond with a thimble. I cannot do that. I may as well give up, give myself to the hag, or simply go home. Drummer, trust me. Trust me. Close your eyes. Put your head on my knee and sleep. When you awake, the pond will be empty, and all of the fish will be stacked in order of size, except for one tiny minnow that will be out of line with the others. When she sees that, she will begin to berate you and insult you. Say nothing, but take the fish and slap her in the face with it." And so, Drummer put his head on her knee, and soon enough he was asleep. And when he awoke, the pond was gone. It was dry, and all of the fish, hundreds and hundreds, were stacked from the smallest to the largest. But way over here, the smallest fish was out of line with the rest. And out of the cottage came the woman and said, "Oh, Oh, beautifully done. An ichthyological wonder. I had not expected this. You went beyond my expectations. Well, I shall have to put off. Well, we won't talk about that, but that one fish! That one fish is out of line with all the rest. How dare you? I cannot stand that. That is abs. He walked over and picked up the fish and slapped her in the face with it. She said nothing, but walked back into the cottage, and he followed her. Tomorrow I will have another task for you, she said. And when he awoke, she did. Here, she said, take these wedges and take this axe. And I want you to go out to that forest. And I want you to chop down every single tree in that forest and stack all the logs and the branches in order of size by sundown. He said, I will. And he walked out with that axe and with the wedges. And the first swing at the first tree, the axe crumpled. It was made of lead. And the wedges, he just simply tried to jam one into the side of a tree, and that was made of tin. He looked at the trees. He looked at his ruined tools. And he sat down on a rock, and he wept, and he wept, until he felt a hand on his shoulder, and he looked up, and there was that same beautiful young woman in the servant's clothes. She said, Drummer, Drummer, why do you weep? Why do I weep? Look at the task that was given me. Look at this. I am to cut down every single tree in this forest and stack them all up in order of size in one day. And what am I given? I'm given an axe of lead and wedges of tin. I should never have come on this journey in the first place. Drummer, Drummer, have faith in me. Drummer, put your head on my knee and sleep. When you wake, all of the trees will be cut down, and all the logs and branches stacked in order of size, except for one small branch, and that will be out of line with the rest. When the hag comes out, she will see those branches and logs and be pleased until she sees that one branch out of line, and she will berate you for that. Say nothing, but hit her in the face with it. And so Drummer fell asleep, and he slept the best sleep he had ever slept. And when he awoke, the maiden was gone, but all the trees were cut down and all the wood stacked in order of size, except for one small branch over to that side. And as he looked at that, he heard a voice behind him. Oh, this is absolutely marvelous. Oh, what a wonderful piece of deforestation. Masterful, my boy. Look at that one single branch over there. That is out of line with the others. That is completely unexcusable. I cannot. And he went over and picked up that branch and hit her in the face with it. She said nothing but grinned, a hideous, toothless grin, and walked into the cottage, and he behind her. And she gave him dinner that night and said, there will be another task tomorrow, and that shall prove what it shall prove. And so after a restless night, he awoke, and she said, I want you to burn all of that wood, scatter it all, and burn it. None shall be left out of that conflagration. None. No sputtering. Every single branch, and here are your tools. And he went out, and he looked at that huge pile of wood, and looked at the tools that she had given him. He thought that she had given him flint and steel. All she gave him were a couple of raisins. He sat down and began to cry. He did not even try, because what was there to try with? And he wept. And again he felt the hand upon his shoulder. And looking up, he saw that beautiful servant girl. She said, "Drummer, drummer, why do you weep?" "Why do I weep? I am to set all of this wood on fire. All of it must burn. But how am I to set a fire? She didn't even give me flint and steel. There is nothing for me to set a fire with. I have wasted my time, and I have broken my promise to the princess." She said, "Drummer, drummer, trust in me. Close your eyes and put your head upon my knee once more, and sleep. When you awake, all will be burning, all of it, except for one single green branch that smolders and that sizzles. The hag will come out. She will take joy in that fire until she sees that single green branch. She will berate you once more. Say nothing to her. Say nothing, but pick her up and throw her in the fire." Drummer was a little dumbfounded at this, but he trusted her. She said one more thing. "Once you have thrown her in the fire, run to that single green leafy branch, pick it up, bring it out of the fire, and throw it down upon the ground." He closed his eyes, put his head in her lap, and he slept. And it was the heat and the roaring of the fire that woke him. And the fire was huge, almost his idea of what hell must have looked like. He had never seen so much destruction in one place. And the hag came out of her stone cottage, and she looked, and she said, "Oh, yes, indeed, this is a wonderful conflagration. Oh, it forms the cockles of what used to be my heart. Oh, beautifully. Ah! Look in there. There is a single green leafy branch that does nothing more than smoke and sizzle. You have failed me. He picked her up, and he'd never been gladder to do something in all of his life than throw her into the middle of the flames. And then he ran to that branch, and he could feel the soles of his shoes burning away as he ran through the fire. He picked up that green branch as it sizzled, and it burned into his hands, and he ran as fast as he could before his shoes and feet burned away to the edge of the fire, and he threw down that branch. The branch broke open, and up and from what was left of it came a white form of a beautiful maiden in a white shift, and her face was the face of the housemaid. And she said, Drummer, Drummer, you have freed me. You have freed me. You have slain the hag who has kept me a slave for, these very many years. You have freed me, and I love you. And you and I, you shall come with me. We shall come together, and you will be a prince. Thank you. And he said, that is amazing. But let's not go alone. I saw gold. I saw silver. I saw many, many things in the cottage. Let's go and get them. No, do not. If you can do it, go back into the fire and find the heart of the hag. That is gold. Much of it. And more than you can imagine in value. And so again, he ran into the fire and he pulled the heart of the hag. And again, it burned into his fingers. But when he came to the edge of the fire and threw it down, there were sacks and sacks of gold. Well, she touched his hands and they were healed. He looked down at the gold and said, we are rich. Richer I will be bound than your father. She said, indeed, that is true. Well, come with me, my darling. Come with me. We will go back to my village and you will meet my parents and then we will go to your father. And she said, do you know how we will go? And he said, I have a magic saddle over here. Sit with me in it and we'll go. She said, no. Put your hand upon my shoulder and I will turn my ring and we will go where you desire. And so he put his hand upon her shoulder and she turned her ring and they were on the outskirts of his village. And he was so happy and he said to her, come, I want you to meet my father and my mother. I want them to know who their daughter shall be. And she said, not yet. Go, see your parents. Bring the gold with you. Show that to them. I will come later. But promise me this. When you see your parents, do not kiss them on the right cheek. Can you remember that? Do not kiss them on the right cheek, or you shall forget me forever. Oh, how could I ever forget you, said the drummer. Oh, of course I won't. You stay here, I will be back. And so he took the gold and he went to his parents' cottage. None of his fellow villagers knew who he was, for though he had only been in the glass mountain, on the glass mountain for 3 days, it had been 3 times that amount in years that he had been gone. He came to the house of his father and knocked upon the door, and his parents looked up at him as if they had seen someone who had risen from the dead, for indeed they thought he was. And they were so happy. So happy. They hugged, and he kissed his parents on both cheeks. The princess knew this. She felt it. And she walked away from the village. Walked and she walked until she came to a peasant's hovel there in the nearby forest, not far from the pond where she and her sisters swam. And she sat, and she sat, and she wept. Meanwhile, Drummer's parents, particularly his father, set about putting that money, those riches, to use. His father knew riches when he saw them and knew that there was more wealth there than most kings would have. He said, well, you are now, whether you have land or not, you are now a prince, and you shall have a castle. And that was the first thing they did. And of course, folks in the village were overjoyed to have the work. And so they built the most majestic castle that anyone had ever seen. And once that had done, young women from all around the world came to vie for Drummer's hand in marriage, to marry Prince Drummer. And one by one, he saw them, they came, and he said, no, not this one. No, not her. Not her. Finally, there was one young woman, the daughter of a faraway king, who seemed fitting. She stirred something in his heart. He said, very well then, I shall marry her. And so the wedding was planned. And in the newly built castle, the decorations were marvelous. The musicians tuning their instruments, even though it was some days away. And the princess sat there in her hovel, but she heard peasants talking about this wedding. And she said, oh, well, I must go. She went into her cottage and she turned her ring. And she said, I would have a dress that is as beautiful as the stars, that shines and twinkles with their life. And she wore that dress on the first night of the rehearsal for the wedding. She came into the castle, and of course the guards saw her, and they bowed. They had no idea who she was, but they knew she must be someone. And the bride happened to see her and said, oh my God, that's the most beautiful dress that I have ever seen. I have no idea what dressmaker that is, but I have to have that dress. Oh, please, can I have the dress, please? And the princess said, I think that might be arranged. What do you want? Anything. What can I have? I can give you anything you want. What would you like? And she said, well, just one thing. I would like to sit by your bridegroom's door tonight. She said the bride, certainly, of course, no problem. Go ahead, give me the dress. And so that night, that bride, who was not the fool she might have seemed to be, went to the local apothecary and had a potion made. She said, my intended is having trouble sleeping at night, and so I would have something that would have him sleep deeply. And the apothecary gave her a phial of this and said, put 3 drops in his wine, and he will sleep through the night. And so the wine was brought in to Drummer, and Drummer drank it off. And so he did not hear the voice outside his door. Oh, drummer, drummer, do you not hear? Do you not recall when you held me near? Do you not recall the mount of glass, or the time that you did through the fire pass? He woke up in the morning with this feeling that he'd had some strange, wonderful, and familiar dream. The princess went back to her hovel. She turned her ring again and said, I would have a dress that glows silver like the moon with all of its light. And she walked again in this beautiful dress back to the castle. And again, the guards, when they saw her, not only did they let her through, but their jaws dropped at the wonder of this garment. And again, the bride saw her and said, oh my God. Oh, I've got to have that. Oh, and I can't live without that dress. Oh, please, please, please give that dress to me. I have to have it, please. Well, I think we could arrange that if you allow me to sit outside your intended's door again tonight. Oh, certainly. No problem whatsoever. I will make sure that you are not bothered at all. Give me that dress. And so she did give her the dress. And that night, again, Drummer drank the wine and fell asleep and did not hear the voice. Oh, drummer, drummer, do you not hear, do you not recall when you held me near? Do you not recall the mount of glass, or the time when you did through the fire pass? And he woke again in the morning, after having a wonderful dream that he could not remember. But again, that feeling of familiarity. The princess sat in her cottage, and she knew this was the last night. Tomorrow would be the wedding. This was her last chance. And she turned her ring one more time. She said, I will have a dress that is gold with all of the light of the sun. And no sooner were the words out of her mouth than that is what she had on. The most resplendent and radiant garment that any human might ever have seen. And she strode with dignity and grace to the gate of the castle, and the guards, knowing the power that lay before them, bowed down as she walked through. And the first person she met was the bride, and the bride said, and the princess said, but of course, and we will have the same agreement tonight as we did last night, will we not? And that night, well, before the drummer went to bed, his servant said, you know, my lord, it's not my place to say anything, but I think you've been missing something. There is this beautiful woman, young woman that sits outside your door each night, and she sings the most amazing song. I really think you should not drink that wine tonight, for I fear that will make you sleep, and you will miss that music, and that is not music for anyone to miss. And so the drummer did not drink the wine. And so he heard, "Oh, drummer, drummer, do you not hear?" I know that voice. I know that voice. "Do you not recall when you held me near?" I do. I recall. I remember. "Do you not recall the Mount of Glass?" The glass mountain? Yeah, the glass, but that seems a dream. "Oh, the time that you did through the fire pass." And all the memories came rushing back into his head, and he flung open the door, and there he saw his beloved, resplendent in her white shift. And he took her in his arms, and he hugged her, he embraced her, he kissed her, and he said, "Come with me." And he ran through the halls, and he came to his parents, and he said, "Mother, Father, this is my true bride. This is my true bride. She is the reason we have all of this. She is my salvation, and she is my love, and I shall marry her." And indeed, he did. A new wedding was planned, and the other bride, who had the most beautiful dresses in the world, and that was enough for her at any rate, was satisfied and went back to her father. But there was a wedding to end all weddings. There was wine from every part of the world, and there were roast beasts of all kinds, and wonderful vegetables, and sherbets, and sweets, and pastries. And there was song, and there was dance. And the wedding cake was the largest anyone had ever seen. I know, because I was there. And they gave me the bottom tier of the wedding cake for me to take home. But when I put it in my cart, it rolled out and down the hill, further and further and further, until there was nothing left but one crumb, and that was taken by a field mouse. But I promise you that if I had that cake, and you were all here with me, you all should have a piece. And that's the drummer from the Brothers Grimm. And I want to thank you for joining me. I so enjoy doing this. And on this day of all, no matter what your faith may be, give thanks for your loved ones. And to you all, I love you.